human presence on Naltha Prime was quickly becoming more than just an embarrassing anomaly for the Federation. It was a nightmare unfolding on a planetary scale. When the Federation sent its peacekeepers to restore order, they were confident their highly trained forces would easily quell whatever minor chaos the humans might have stirred. After all, the Nalthans were a peaceful species, and humans were considered an unruly, unpredictable species from a savage, hazardous world. They were resilient, yes, but how could they possibly stand against the might of the Federation's military? It didn't take long for the peacekeepers to realize they had vastly underestimated both the humans and Naltha Prime itself. From the moment they touched down, something was off. The peaceful environment, which had been meticulously cultivated by the Nalthans over millennia, was reacting as if it were alive, angry, sentient, and eager to fight. The air was thick with an unnatural tension, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift and pulse like the heartbeat of a living creature. The Federation forces were used to combat on hostile worlds, but they had never seen anything like this. Strange, violent weather patterns had begun to form, throwing off their navigation systems, heavy storms that erupted out of nowhere, massive wind currents and flashes of lightning that were far too precise to be natural. The Nalthan animals, who had never shown aggression before, were now attacking in packs, lashing out at anything that moved. It was as if the very ecosystem had turned hostile, as if the planet itself had been awakened by the human presence. The Nalthans had no idea what was happening, and the Federation forces quickly found themselves on the back foot. The more they tried to control the situation, the worse it became. Meanwhile, the humans, led by Ambassador Langley, seemed to be thriving in this new chaotic environment. The Nalthans had assumed that their peaceful world would be enough to pacify the humans, to show them the superiority of cooperation over conflict. But Langley and his team did the unthinkable. They didn't run, they didn't retreat, they embraced the challenge. They adapted. Where the Federation had expected panic and chaos, they found calm, focused survival. The humans took what the planet gave them: poisonous plants, aggressive wildlife, unstable terrain, and used it to their advantage. They became hunters in a new kind of jungle, making weapons out of the very flora that had once been harmless, crafting traps from vines and thorns, and fighting back against the vicious wildlife that had suddenly turned on the Nalthans. The Nalthans, who had never known conflict, began to learn from the humans. They were shown how to trap, how to hunt, how to fight. The Federation's forces, however, were not nearly as adaptable. They were trained for conventional warfare, for maintaining peace, for controlling chaos with force. But this wasn't a war they could win through might. Naltha Prime had become a living hellscape, and the Federation's technology and tactics were completely useless against it. The Federation's rifles couldn't stop the relentless assault of mutated creatures. Their shields couldn't block the torrential storms that seemed to rise out of nowhere. The land itself was a weapon, an opponent that adapted faster than they could. And then came the realization. It wasn't just the environment that had been altered. The very foundation of Naltha Prime's ecosystem had shifted to accommodate humanity. The plants were no longer just plants. They were alive in a way no one had ever seen before. The creatures, once passive, had turned into merciless hunters. The terrain itself had become a labyrinth of danger, a maze designed to kill anyone who wasn't prepared, and it was all a reaction to the humans. The question that began to spread through the Federation was chilling. How did humanity trigger this? It wasn't just that the humans had survived. They had somehow provoked Naltha Prime's ecosystem into a complete transformation, one that the Federation couldn't control or even fully understand. The very rules of the planet seemed to have shifted, as though the land itself had learned from the humans' tenacity, their ability to survive in impossible conditions. The Nalthans, in awe of what the humans were capable of, had begun to accept their teachings. They had no choice. The Federation forces were losing ground, and the once peaceful planet was rapidly becoming a killing ground. Ambassador Langley, ever calm and methodical, reached out to the Federation leadership. The message he sent was simple, but its implications were terrifying. "We will leave Naltha Prime, but we need something from you." The Federation leaders, already dealing with the catastrophic failure of their peacekeeping efforts, were intrigued and horrified. What could the humans possibly want now? Had they finally broken under the pressure of their own survival instincts? Would they demand compensation for the chaos they had caused? Or worse, would they seek to control Naltha Prime and turn it into a fortress? "We want recognition," he said. "Recognition that humanity is not a species to be dismissed. We have not just survived, we have conquered. Naltha Prime has shown you the truth. We can adapt to any challenge, survive any catastrophe, thrive in the most hostile of environments. This galaxy may have laughed at us before, but the joke is over." The Federation's council was silent as Langley's words sank in. Recognition. Of what? That humanity was no longer just another species clinging to survival on a hostile world? That they were now a legitimate, undeniable force to be reckoned with? The Federation had always dismissed humanity as little more than a curiosity, but now the Deathworlders had turned Naltha Prime into an uncontrollable, living nightmare and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger than ever. It was a bitter pill for the Federation to swallow. They had laughed at humans for so long. They had underestimated their strength, their resilience, their ability to survive against overwhelming odds. But now Naltha Prime had proven that humanity was something else entirely. A species forged in the crucible of a death world, tempered by violence, adaptation, and an unparalleled will to endure. And as the Federation's leaders pondered Langley's message, something profound began to settle in. Humanity was not just a curiosity, they were a threat. A threat not in the conventional sense of weaponry or military might, but in the sheer force of their will to survive. The galaxy had made a grave mistake in underestimating them. And as Ambassador Langley and his team made their preparations to leave Naltha Prime, they knew they had won. Not just a battle, but a war. One that would echo throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. The Deathworlders had proven that they were not just survivors, they were conquerors, and they would never be laughed at again. The Federation's leadership, now fully aware of the potential threat humanity represented, began to rethink their entire approach to dealing with humans. There would be no more condescension, no more dismissal. From this moment on, humanity would be recognized as an equal, if not a superior, force in the galaxy. They had survived the impossible, and the Federation had learned the hard way that when humans faced the unimaginable, they didn't just endure, they conquered. The galaxy would never look at Deathworlders the same way again, and humanity at last would take its place at the table as more than just survivors. They would become the fearsome, unyielding power they had always been, and they would demand the respect they had earned. Footnote: the screaming had stopped, but the lessons were just beginning. The Federation was in disarray. Naltha Prime was a failure. The peaceful world, once considered a model for galactic cooperation, had been transformed into a battlefield by forces no one had fully understood or anticipated. The planet's ecosystem had become an opponent in its own right, reshaping itself in response to humanity's presence. As the Federation scrambled to understand the unexplainable phenomena, it became increasingly clear that the humans were not just survivors, they had become the architects of their own destiny. The reality was undeniable. Humanity had adapted, and the galaxy's once dismissive view of them was no longer tenable. Ambassador David Langley, standing at the forefront of the human delegation, had been relentless in his pursuit of respect. The Federation's initial assumption was that humans had merely endured the environmental chaos of Naltha Prime. that they had somehow stumbled through it by the sheer force of will. But Langley knew better. The truth was much darker, much more calculated. The humans weren't simply weathering the storm. They were orchestrating it. They were pushing Naltha Prime's ecosystem to its limits, bending it to their will, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy a brutal truth. Humans were not only capable of surviving in the harshest of environments, they could thrive, evolve, and conquer even in the most hostile circumstances. Langley's message to the Federation had been simple, but its implications were seismic. We've learned what we need to learn. We've proven our point. We've done what you thought impossible. Now, we are no longer asking for your approval. We demand it. His words had rattled the Federation to its core. What had been an experiment, a diplomatic mission, had turned into a spectacle of survival, and the humans had made it clear that they were no longer content to sit at the back of the galactic table. The Nalthans had witnessed their power firsthand. It was a power born of necessity, of survival, of an intrinsic drive to adapt to the impossible. And as Langley and his team prepared to leave Naltha Prime, the Federation knew one thing with certainty. They could not afford to ignore humanity any longer. The humans had proven something the galaxy had always doubted, that they were unbreakable. This was not just a matter of adapting to the environment. It was about mastering it. Preconceptions had come together to carry out their plans. The preconceptions had been important, but now they mattered less. The Federation's scientific community, which had initially chalked up the transformation of Naltha Prime to mere coincidence, was now faced with an existential question. Had the humans triggered this? Had they, unknowingly or not, unlocked the primal forces of the planet itself? The Federation's once dismissive view of humanity began to fracture under the weight of what they had witnessed. The humans were no longer the naive, dangerous species from a hostile world. They were formidable. They were no longer just resilient. They were a new breed of predator, capable of outlasting and overpowering anything that stood in their way. The Federation had spent centuries fostering peace and cooperation between species, and yet, in the face of humanity's unyielding survival instinct, that peace now felt fragile, almost irrelevant. What about empathy? As the last Federation peacekeeping vessels began to retreat from Naltha Prime, the Nalthan people, once terrified and confused by the changes, had come to a realization of their own. They had watched as the humans adapted not just to the environment, but to the turmoil they themselves had never known. The humans had shown them a new way of life, one forged through conflict, survival, and an undying will to exist. It was a lesson the Nalthans would never forget. Back in the heart of the Federation, the leadership held an emergency council session. The representatives of various species gathered, tense and uncertain. The humans had left Naltha Prime, but their presence was still being felt across the galaxy. The Nalthans had sent a report that sent shockwaves through the Federation's leaders. Humanity had left Naltha Prime behind, but they had left something else in their wake, a new kind of balance. The ecosystem of Naltha Prime, once an idyllic paradise, had been reshaped by humanity's very presence. The Federation couldn't explain it, but the proof was undeniable. The once peaceful planet was now a dangerous crucible where survival was a contest against nature itself, and the humans had become the champions of that contest. The debate among the Federation Council was fierce. Some argued that humanity's actions could not go unpunished. They had disrupted a planet, incited chaos, and nearly brought the Federation's peacekeeping forces to their knees. Others, however, saw the truth in Langley's message. Humanity had not just survived the chaos, they had mastered it. The question wasn't whether humanity should be recognized as a galactic power, it was whether the Federation could afford to ignore their potential any longer. The Deathworlders, once a laughingstock, had proven themselves to be more than capable of holding their own. The idea of dismissing them now seemed absurd, even dangerous. The Federation could no longer afford to treat humanity like an afterthought. On the outskirts of the debate, an unlikely coalition began to form. The Talora, known for their intellectual prowess, were the first to see the implications of humanity's actions. If humans could transform a planet like Naltha Prime, what could they do with the resources, the knowledge, the technology that the Federation had accumulated over centuries? What kind of power could they wield if they were allowed to participate fully in galactic affairs? The Talora had always believed in peaceful diplomacy, but the events on Naltha Prime had shaken them to their core. They were witnessing the birth of a new, unpredictable force, one that might very well surpass the Federation itself. But there were others who saw humanity's rise as a threat. The Zakar, a militaristic species that had long held sway over galactic defense, were not ready to accept that the humans had the potential to rival their own power. They argued that humanity's ability to manipulate ecosystems and alter environments was not a sign of strength, but of instability, a dangerous force that could unravel the carefully maintained order of the galaxy. The Zakar were determined to protect their place at the top of the power structure, and they were willing to go to great lengths to ensure that humanity would never rise to challenge them. The Galactic Federation had always prided itself on the peaceful coexistence of countless species, each with their own unique capabilities and cultures. Yet, among all the races that populated the stars, there was one species that never quite fit the mold: humanity. Humans were known as Deathworlders, creatures from a planet so hostile, so rife with predators, extreme environments, and natural disasters that it was thought to be a wonder they had survived at all. Most other species regarded them as primitive, resilient to a degree, but in no way a threat to the well-established galactic order. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth was a curiosity, a world where death lurked in every corner, where humanity had somehow learned to adapt, to survive against overwhelming odds. But no one took them seriously, not really. They were, after all, a species of animals, just another pack of bipedal apes with too much ambition and too little self-retrieval. That was until the incident on Naltha Prime. Naltha Prime was a tranquil world, a paradise of lush jungles and calm oceans, the perfect example of what a peaceful Federation planet should be. No wars, no violence, just simple, organic living. It was a haven for diplomats, a retreat world where members of the Federation often visited to relax, mediate disputes, or seek enlightenment. Stera Atriosis is a program designed to treat. The Federation had arranged a summit, an event that would host representatives from all over the galaxy. Among them, humans had been invited to speak on their future as a galactic species. The hope was to finally incorporate humanity into the fold of galactic diplomacy, despite their rocky beginnings. Their diplomats were often seen as outliers, their gestures of peace misunderstood. Still, it was hoped that in time the Federation could bring them in, make them part of the family. A small delegation of humans arrived on Naltha Prime, led by Ambassador David Langley. They were given the usual warm welcome, the customary gifts of Nalthan fruit, and a short tour of the planet's most pristine locations. The Nalthans had their reservations, of course. There was a lingering wariness about these strange, unpredictable creatures, but nothing truly eventful was expected. Just another diplomatic exchange. It started with something trivial. One of the human diplomats, unfamiliar with the native flora, wandered off the prescribed paths and stepped into a grove of trees. A simple mistake, but these were no ordinary trees. They had evolved over millennia to defend themselves from predators, and in their view, humans were just another form of danger. The trees released a powerful toxin into the air, causing immediate paralysis in the human. Within moments, the diplomat collapsed, gasping for air as his body was overtaken by the venom. The Nalthans, who had never faced such a threat, had no means of counteracting it. Their medical technology could do nothing. The Federation responded immediately, but by the time they arrived, It was already too late. The diplomat had died. The diplomat's party arrived a little after 11 and touched off their death-blade weapons. The diplomats, led by American ex-Bright Sergeant George Felder, went on to say that they had come to protect. To the Nalthans, this was an unfortunate if tragic occurrence, but it was only the beginning of a nightmare they would never forget. In the following days, the situation escalated. Wildlife, which had been docile for centuries, suddenly became aggressive. Creatures that once lived peacefully in the great forests of Naltha Prime began to attack, driven by an unseen, unnatural force. The environment itself seemed to warp. The Nalthans, who had never known what it was like to truly fight for survival, were caught unprepared. Animals they had coexisted with for centuries were now acting as if they were the hunted. And then came the plants. The once serene jungles of Naltha Prime began to mutate. Vines thickened, twisted, and became armed with thorns sharp enough to tear through armor. Flowers released toxic spores into the air, and bushes grew rapidly, blocking roads and restricting movement. As the Nalthans scrambled to figure out what was happening, they began to realize that the very land was fighting back. It wasn't a coincidence. The entire ecosystem had been affected by the presence of the humans, and it seemed intent on wiping them out. Ambassador Langley, though, was far from defeated. His response was not to flee, but to adapt. He began to instruct his people on how to survive this new hostile world. He taught them how to use the environment to their advantage, how to turn the deadly plants and animals into tools of survival. For the first time, the humans were not merely enduring, they were thriving. The world swallowed the queen. They didn't just learn to defend themselves, they began to take control. When Nalthan peacekeepers were sent to the planet to stabilize the situation, they found themselves overwhelmed. Nalthan Prime's ecosystem was fighting them. The jungles had turned into a battleground, with every form of life now an enemy, from venomous insects to predatory beasts that had never shown aggression before. And the humans, they were still standing. In fact, they were teaching the Nalthans how to fight back. The Nalthans watched, stunned, as the human diplomats crafted makeshift weapons from the planet's flora, set traps, and fought tooth and nail against their own environment. Humans had a way of making themselves the apex predators, no matter what world they found themselves on. The Federation, growing concerned, sent a fleet of peacekeeping forces, but the more they attempted to intervene, the worse the situation became. The animals and plants, already reacting to human presence, now sensed the intrusion of an external force. What followed was a terrifying spiral into chaos. The peaceful world of Naltha Prime was becoming a war zone, and it was all because of the humans. The Federation couldn't contain the mess they had unleashed. They had no idea what had happened. They had underestimated humanity, thinking it was just another species of curious, aggressive creatures. What they failed to realize was that humans weren't just resilient. They weren't just lucky. Humans were made of something else, something stronger. They had evolved on a world that had tried to kill them for millennia, and in response they had learned to fight back. And now, that survival instinct, honed through generations, was playing out on a galactic scale. The Federation realized too late what they had done. They had laughed at the humans, mocked them for their seemingly unrefined ways. They had assumed that the Deathworlders, the creatures from a hellish planet, were nothing but a joke. But the joke was on them. The humans had turned Naltha Prime into a battleground, one they controlled. And as the Federation forces began to fall back, retreating in defeat, one thing became clear. Humanity was not a joke. It was a species to be feared. The humans, for their part, had learned everything they needed to survive. They didn't just leave the planet, they conquered it. And the Federation, humiliated and afraid, realized they had made a grave mistake. The humans weren't just a species to be tolerated. They were a force of nature, a Deathworld species who had mastered survival in ways the galaxy had never even imagined. And now humanity was no longer the joke, they were a warning. The Federation would never laugh at Deathworlders again. The Federation had underestimated humanity for the last time. For centuries, the other species in the galaxy had treated humans with a mix of disdain and condescension. They were seen as primitive, reckless creatures from a violent, unpredictable planet, a death world that no one could fathom. Earth had been regarded as a curious oddity, a dangerous experiment in survival that would eventually burn itself out. Before trouble could reign, Earth had been regarded as a curious oddity, a dangerous experiment in survival that would eventually burn itself out. There had always been skepticism about humanity's potential to adapt to galactic society. But no one had considered that humanity might not just adapt, humans might actually excel at the chaos of the galaxy. The aftermath of the Naltha Prime disaster sent shockwaves through the Federation, rippling through diplomatic circles and military commands alike. The peaceful world of Naltha Prime had been rendered nearly uninhabitable by a force no one could control: humanity itself. When the Federation had finally deployed its peacekeeping forces to restore order, they realized too late that the planet's ecosystem, in some inexplicable way, had begun to fight back against every species, every form of intervention. And the humans? The humans had not only survived, they had begun to master the new, hostile environment. What started as a diplomatic visit had devolved into something far darker. Ambassador David Langley and his team had not just endured the growing chaos, they had turned it into an opportunity. While the Nalthans struggled to understand what was happening, the humans had adapted, using their innate resourcefulness and cunning to make weapons out of the planet's own deadly flora and fauna. Where others saw a collapsing ecosystem, humanity saw a challenge, a battle to be fought and won. The human delegation didn't retreat. They regrouped, they fought, and they prevailed. In the process, they began to unlock secrets of Naltha Prime that no one had ever imagined. Plants evolved on the fly, crafting toxins and sharp defensive thorns that could slice through flesh. Animals, once docile and peaceful, became violent predators, their instincts seemingly twisted by an alien influence. The Federation's peacekeepers, sent in to stop the spiraling chaos, had no idea how to respond. They were equipped for peacekeeping, for keeping balance, for managing crises in controlled environments. But they weren't prepared for a living planet fighting back. And they certainly weren't prepared for humanity, who seemed to thrive amidst the madness. The humans had turned Naltha Prime into a proving ground, a crucible of survival, and they had come out stronger for it. They knew how to turn the most lethal of environments into an asset, how to manipulate the deadly forces of nature into tools of defense and offense. They didn't just fight to survive, they fought to win. Every attempt the Federation made to neutralize the threat of the ecosystem failed. The wildlife was too unpredictable, the environment too volatile. The Federation forces began to lose ground, their advanced technology powerless against the rapidly mutating life forms of Naltha Prime. It wasn't just about animals and plants anymore. It was a planetary upheaval. The very ground itself seemed to be resisting the Federation's presence. The weather became erratic. Massive storms that could wipe out entire fleets of peacekeepers in a matter of hours. Mountains began to shake as underground tremors racked the land. Seismic events reshaped entire cities. At first, the Federation believed it was all a natural phenomenon, a coincidental disturbance triggered by the arrival of so many alien forces. But as the days wore on, it became clear that the planet was reacting to the humans. Somehow, some way, humanity had awakened something in Naltha Prime, something dangerous and alive. And it wasn't just the environment that had been altered. It was the people. The humans began to train the Nalthans, teaching them to fight. They became the unlikeliest of survivalists. passing on their knowledge of guerrilla tactics, hunting strategies, and adaptive survival techniques to the natives. The Nalthans, peaceful by nature, had no concept of true conflict. They had never had to fight for survival, let alone fight for their lives against a world that was changing before their very eyes. But in the face of this terrifying new reality, the Nalthans learned quickly. They adapted as best as they could, under the tutelage of the humans. They started to work together, weaving the strange, living planet's dangers into a form of protection. The Federation forces, still attempting to quell the unrest, found themselves caught in a deadly game. The humans had not only learned to survive, they were beginning to lead. It was a brutal, savage contest, one that could not be won through technology alone. It was a test of will, of cunning, of endurance. The Federation's finest soldiers had been rendered ineffective, their weapons useless against the living nightmare that had been unleashed. And as the conflict spread, as the Federation forces began to retreat, they were forced to realize something they had never considered before. The humans weren't just surviving on Naltha Prime, they were thriving. Ambassador Langley's message to the Federation leadership was simple, but chilling. "We will leave the planet, but we need something from you." It wasn't a demand for resources, territory, or even military support. It was something far more unsettling. A request for recognition. Recognition that humanity was not just some primitive species to be pacified, but a force in its own right. A force capable of surviving in the most hostile environments, of adapting and thriving when everything around them crumbled. The Federation, of course, balked at the suggestion. The idea that humanity could ever be considered a legitimate threat, a true power in the galaxy, was inconceivable. The galactic order had always been built on the foundation of peaceful cooperation, with each species taking its place as equals. The Nalthans were the peaceful ones. The Tsalora were the intellectual powerhouses. The humans, with their brutal origins, had never been anything more than a curiosity, a species who had somehow survived despite their dangerous world. But now, as the Federation leadership sat in their chambers, watching reports of their peacekeepers falling back in defeat, something began to change. Perhaps the humans were something more. Perhaps humanity had learned to fight in ways that the Federation couldn't even comprehend. The better, they had transformed Naltha Prime into a living war zone, and yet they had mastered it. They had thrived. And as the final human ambassador, David Langley, stood before the Federation's council, he made it clear, the humans were no longer the joke of the galaxy. The Deathworlders were a species to be respected. No longer could the galaxy ignore their potential, their will to survive. If the Federation was to continue to exist, humanity would have to be part of it, not as subordinates, not as a footnote in the annals of galactic history, but as equals. It was a chilling realization for the Federation. They had laughed at the Deathworlders for so long, until the screaming started. The galaxy would never laugh at humanity again.